So I'd like to give a great welcome to Thom, and thank you very much for spending your Sunday morning with us. And the stage is yours. I'm going to silence myself, and you're going to unmute yourself.
All righty then. Good morning. Thank you for having me. I have to say hi to Carol. Um, Carol and I have been working together for just a few years now, like 7 of them maybe. Um, and it's just so cool to see you here, and everybody else. Yeah, I'm not accustomed to having only 30 minutes. I generally like to speak for about 3 days. Um, so I'm a little challenged here. Um, so I'm going to try to fit in as much useful information as I can for you. And Yeah, kind of like that. I have some notes I scribbled along here. Um, and Yeah, so first, I guess I'd like to talk about what is nonviolent communication. What do we talk about when we talk about needs or the work of Marshall Rosenberg? Um, and I think that's probably best told through a little parable of mine, which is kind of how my whole search for this work started, which was in 1969, when there was a military action. I don't think we were allowed to call it a war then either, in Vietnam. And Life magazine had done a spread on a photojournalistic spread on what became known as the My Lai massacre. And It was a pivotal moment in my life because it was really the first time, I grew up, as many of us did, watching these very romantic movies about war, and we would see, our heroes survive, and if somebody got shot, they would just, the only reason you knew they got shot was because they went like this and fell over. And so we really were given, at least I was given, a very sterilized version of what war was really about. And so this this vision that Life magazine provided was absolutely horrific. It was like nothing I had ever seen or imagined in my life. And I will never get that image of a 3-year-old girl running down a muddy road crying her heart out. And it was such a pivotal moment for me because it just changed how I saw reality. It was like, wait a minute, I live here where this happens, where people can treat each other like this. And it really, it started a search for me. And I remember talking to my parents, and they would say, no, this is part of being humans. We have war. It's horrible, but yeah, it's something we do. And I could not for the life of me believe anybody who told me that this was necessary, which was pretty tough for an 11, 12-year-old to decide that I was going to go against everything that everybody told me, including the grown-ups. And so I started my search for why this wasn't necessary. How could it be that this was necessary? And I was like, no, it's not necessary. I don't know how it's not necessary, but it's got to be not necessary. And so my search began, and I was, like I said, around 12. And it wasn't until I was darn close to 40 that I finally found what I was looking for. And it was in this book called A Language of Life by a guy named Marshall Rosenberg. And what he said in his book, I'm going to super paraphrase here. What he pointed out was that when we become aware, acutely aware, of our own and one another's needs, something happens to us humans. And that is that we become compassionate. We become concerned. You cannot, and think about this, you can't, if there were a 3-year-old girl starving naked in your house, what would you do? Would you say, oh, well, that's the way life is? No, we would do something. We are compelled as humans to help one another. In fact, I'm pretty sure that's why we're so, quote, successful on the planet, is because we do work together. We have that capability. And when we're not together, when we're not in connection, that's when things start to go sideways. And so the idea is that we have, the more that we can become aware of our own and each other's universal needs, the more we're going to care about each other. Flat out. The more compassion we will have. And so the reason this is so important to me, and I suspect to you, is that if we look at the problems of the world, the horrible things that are happening on this planet, the just absolutely tragic things that go on, if we applied, or if we could provide or bring into the light compassion, these things would go away. Compassion cannot live next to violence. Compassion can't live next to starvation. Compassion cannot live next to child soldiers. So the reason this is so important to us as humans is because what it does is it compels us. Compassion compels us to be human, to be the most beautiful part of being human there is, which is this idea of compassion, of caring, of wanting everybody's life to matter as much as our own life matters. And so, you know, you'd think as humans, we've been around for about 5 million years, you would think we would have figured this out by now. You know, it's funny, if you go back, you know, and religion kind of took over for a while as our kind of yardstick for behavior. But that didn't really hold. I mean, it's interesting. I look at the Buddhists, for example. As a Buddhist, if you, quote, behave, you will not have to live forever. You'll get to leave this life. And then the Christians came along and said, if you behave, you get to live forever. So which is it that we want, and why are we doing this? So basically, we were trying to think ourselves into being compassionate, right? Make rules and laws that we would have to follow, commandments, if you will. When all along, as it turns out, we have the ability to solve all our problems, to care about all of our problems, and to actually do something, to really do something about them. So this kind of, to me, was the answer of how do we live? How do we live as humans? Not as Christians, not as Buddhists, not as Muslims, but as humans. How do we live? How do we take guidance from life itself without there being this kind of human aspect superimposed on it, which, you know, we talk about judgment, for example, moralistic judgment, right, wrong thinking. Well, if you think about it, right, wrong thinking is at the base of many, many violent interactions. So the idea that I'm right and you're wrong really drives us apart. And so what Marshall Rosenberg did was he came up with this, really it was an observation, that we can be guided as to how it is we live by paying attention to what he called life energy. What is life energy? So life energy, in short, is needs. So if you look at your needs sheet, if you have one, which I hope you do, let's see, I think I have one here too I can share with you. I'll do that now. Where are we? There we go. So this is the needs sheet. Can you see this okay? Let's see if I can get us a little more expanded. Is that visible for you? Just a show of a thumb, a nod? Good. So if you just take a peek at this, this is what we call needs and values. In other words, not just things we absolutely need like air and food and water, but things that we love, things that we want to see in our lifetime, things that we would like to see for everybody in life. And so you could look at this list and you could see that this is not a moralistic view of the world. This is a what I could call human look at the world. Now, it's interesting, right? Look at this list, and is there anything on this list you don't want? Is there anything on this list my 30-year-old son doesn't want? Is there anything on this list my 3-year-old grandson doesn't want? These are things of life. And if you really said, well, what are needs? I like to ask, well, what do you call somebody without needs? As a philosophy major, I would, here's our inquiry. So what do you call somebody without needs? I know Carol knows the answer. We call them dead. We call them a cadaver, a body. And so what, if we just go with this, what does that make needs? You could say that needs are the expression of life. You could say that these words that we're all looking at are how we wrap our heads around this experience that we are all having. And so the reason this is so important is that it's universal. It doesn't matter your age, it doesn't matter your culture. So I teach this literally in every culture in the world. There is no culture that rejects this. Why? Because it's human. This transcends culture. And so for me, it becomes incredibly important. This is how I can relate to somebody who's had a completely different life than I have had, but yet we're the same creatures inside. And so it's this idea that everything we do to meet a need now gives us a perspective, what I'm going to call needs awareness, a way to see the world in view of needs, not in the view of, is this right, is this wrong, should, shouldn't, evil, good. This is more about the stuff of life. And so what we can do is, when we can start to pay attention to these things, and this is what Marshall really showed us all, that the more we are aware of our own and each other's universal, now these are universal human needs. They don't make a human body, they don't make a human model that doesn't have these. We all have these. And so this is Rumi's field, as we would say. If you've ever heard that poem by Rumi, there's a place where we can meet beyond right and wrong. Here it is. So what happens is we start to look at how this changes how we think, or gives us the opportunity to think. So the way I like to characterize this is that I can stop thinking about what's right and wrong, and I can start thinking about what works and what doesn't work. What contributes to life, what connects us to life, and what takes away from life, what disconnects us from life. And so this is a way to see yourself. It's a way to see the world. And the idea is that we are all, even though we're having a different life, we're all experiencing needs. So that is a way for us to be together. It's a way for us to understand one another, even if the actions that we're talking about may be absolutely abhorrent to us. And this is a really important part of this, because if we can't do that, if we can't come back from somebody doing something that we consider absolutely abhorrent and tragic, if we can't do that in some non-violent way, if we can't, then we're going to be stuck in this cycle. And it seems that we know where that's happening on the planet. We can see where it's happening on the planet. And so the idea behind Marshall's work and the idea behind my work is specifically to help us as humans understand our lot here on the planet and figure out ways that we can use this knowledge to change how it is we live. Not because we're going to go to hell if we don't, not because we're going to have to live forever in the winds of karma, but simply because we're wired this way, that we're wired to love. And that's really what compassion is, right? It's this loving energy, this compelling loving energy that we can all experience. So what Marshall did was he figured out how. How do you do that? So up to this point, there was a lot of shouldn't thinking, right? Like, that's morally wrong. You should not do that. The problem is, if somebody's telling you you're doing something you shouldn't do, that is not going to connect us. In fact, it makes things worse. And so how do you do this? Well, again, this idea of, well, what you're doing doesn't really work. It's not working. How do I describe that? Well, this is how I describe it with needs. So this is a super important aspect to this. So why don't we do this? Why don't we all just memorize this list and understand how it lives in us and go on? Well, it's because we've been taught a lot of other things, right? We've been taught shouldn't thinking. We've been taught right-wrong thinking. And so the thing with right-wrong thinking is it doesn't come from nature. It comes from us. And it's a very mental kind of thing, whereas life is a very physical experience. And so the idea here is that if we can learn that these exist, number one, see them, needs, this thing, I call it the parallel universe. We're all in it right now. We're all experiencing it right now. If you look at this list, you're meeting some needs right now, right? Just by being here. Take a look. What do you, maybe we could open the chat a little bit. Let's see if we can get that going. And what needs do you think you're meeting by being here right now, for example? So take a look at the needs list, and then what I'm going to ask you to do is kind of fun. Type in, but don't press enter yet. Just type the word in to the chat. What need, or words, what need or needs do you think you're meeting by being here? Just type it in, but don't press enter. Got that? Let's take a minute, take a peek. And now press enter. And we can see everybody's. Okay. Connection, belonging, connection, meaning, peace, community, purpose, inclusion, presence, connection, self-connection, purpose, perspective, meaning, peace. These are things that we all understand naturally because we experience them in life. So what Marshall Rosenberg did was he put these words to the experience that we're having. And now we have a way of bringing our awareness of needs or our awareness of life into our view more and more. One of the ways we do this is by paying attention to feelings. So there's also that feeling sheet that you have. Let me see if I can bring that up. I should be able to bring that up. Let's see. Here we go. Page 2. Here we go. And let me just do a quick share here. And here we go. So as it turns out, how do we do that? How do we pay attention to life energy? How do we pay attention to needs? Well, we do it, one of the ways we do it is by noticing our words. The other one is by, if I'm saying should or shouldn't, or if I'm saying the words right or wrong. Another way we become aware of them is by using this idea of feelings. And feelings, for most of us, didn't exactly have a great, I know for me certainly, didn't have a great function in life until it occurred to me, or I was told or informed that there's a reason I have feelings. They're telling me something. Feelings are telling me if my needs are being met or not. Think about that, right? Every time you have a feeling that's associated with a met need, it feels pretty good. And the feelings that we have that are associated with unmet needs, they don't feel good. They're telling us something. They're kind of pushing us to change something. So I love this because this helps me appreciate my needs when they're met, and it helps me understand that they're not met. So again, why don't we do this? Why don't we just memorize the list and boom, boom, boom? Well, for many of us, we were taught that feelings are not a good idea, right? That feelings, like needs, are perhaps a sign of weakness, or that they're just useless. I know that was a biggie for me because they didn't do anything for me. They just felt crummy or felt good. So what Marshall did was he created this connection between the two, which increases our ability to experience or to understand this parallel universe that we're living in, and eventually start to live informed by this. And the idea behind this is that it's like an ingrained program that we have. We don't have to go outside. We don't have to go to Christianity. We don't have to go to Buddhism. We don't have to go to a religion to get informed as to what works and what doesn't work. We have that ability ourselves as humans, if we can become aware of our feelings and needs. And I know that sounds incredibly simple, and it is. It's just incredibly difficult. Now, why is it difficult? It's difficult because of how we were raised. I was raised, as many of you were, to really put down or suppress feelings. Anybody here ever been told you're being too emotional, or that you're a crybaby, or just stop that? Right? Don't be a baby. Stiff upper lip. So that was us being taught to not pay attention to this thing that was telling us about our lives. And so what Marshall gave me and left his legacy for the world is that he's left us a path. And that path is paved with an awareness of needs. And that path is paved with an awareness of feelings. And it gives us the ability to start living our lives differently, to start living our lives in a way that is connected to life, that's connected to one another, connected to ourselves as well. And so I'm not even sure Marshall understood the impact of this when he came up with it. It almost overtook his life because it was so incredibly effective. So, yeah, so the idea here is that we all have feelings and needs, and we can use and develop and use an awareness of these in order for us to see the world differently, but very specifically to resolve conflicts, to be able to understand one another, particularly when we've done something that is absolutely horrible. And so the idea here is, we heard there's no bad people, just bad actions kind of thing. This is the next level of that, which is that people do things that are absolutely horrible. I mean, we're seeing it right now if you have a television. So how can we have compassion for people who are doing things that we consider absolutely horrible? So it's by looking and wondering what is going on for them when it comes to feelings and needs. So just one thing I'd like to add here, and then I'd like to open it to questions. There's been a lot of questioning around, well, especially in our community, well, if this works so well, why is Ukraine being destroyed right now? And it's a tough question, right? You would think, well, this isn't working. How does that work? So this is kind of an advanced idea for this work, but one of the things that we really talk about is enemy images, which isolate us from one another, that we create enemy images and we stop thinking about people as being people, and we think about them as the enemy. That's one thing. And the other idea is that if somebody's going to, come at you with a 2x4 or with a bomb, are you going to be empathic? Or are you going to say, I guess you're really frustrated right now and you just really need to express yourself, and so here, try this shoulder. No, that's not realistic. So I want to get clear that this is a super practical way of living. And what I mean by that is that there's a concept, even in this horrible situation we're in, which you would think would totally test any idea, that what's going on in Ukraine. And so there is an idea called the protective use of force. Now, this is different from the one we grew up with. We grew up with what's called a punitive use of force. And you'll hear it. We need to punish. And that's why we use violence to punish. But there's another, we use physical force to punish, which equals violence. So I'd like to suggest that there is such a thing as physical force that's not violent. And I call that the protective use of force. So we're not saying don't do anything. We're saying do something with love in your heart. So it could be that the actions look almost identical of a protective use or a punitive use of force. The difference is what's going on in here. What's going on in here? What is the world that we are creating and leaving behind in our actions, with our actions? And so I'll just be as quick as I can here. Let's use the example of a 2-year-old, because I know 2-year-olds have almost no impulse control. And so if a 2-year-old runs into the street and I grab that 2-year-old and I give him a swat on the butt and I say, bad boy, I'm going to put you in your pen here, in your playpen here. Don't you ever do that again. Now you stay here. So that would be the punitive use of force. And what did our 2-year-old learn? That they're bad people, that they do wrong things, and that my my source of life, my parent, is angry with me. That's horrible. Think about that as a 2-year-old, to think that your very source of life is angry with you. So let's go back and try this again. My 2-year-old runs into the street, and I run and I grab my 2-year-old, and I say, that was scary. People are driving cars on the road. They don't expect you to be there. And I'm scared that you're going to be hurt. And so I'm going to take you and I'm going to put you in your playpen where I know you're going to be safe. So you see what happened there? They know that I love them. They know that it's not safe to be there. And they know that I am protecting them, not punishing them by putting them in the playpen. So we can take this simple example and just keep bringing it to situation after situation, all the way up to a war in Ukraine, where what do? Well, we still have, and we haven't done yet, at least to the extent possible, used our ability to have a protective use of force. I think the important part of this is that we're not out of luck. It's not like, well, the people who are using violence get to win because we are nonviolent and they're violent, and then they always win. So what do? Well, we use force, but we don't use violence. And what is the difference? It's here. It's here. Am I protecting something? Am I fighting for something? Or am I destroying something? And so this parallel universe of feelings and needs gives us the ability to understand very clearly what we are for, what it is that we want to be experiencing that we're not experiencing, and then to be able to find ways to bring that into the world. So it's a map, right? It's like a map of what it means to be a human and how we live. And although we only have a few minutes left, I would just like to point out that if you want to try this, and this is one of the first times I've actually not brought us through an exercise. So I'm very anxious about this. And so what I'm going to do is ask you, if this sounds remotely interesting to you, to go to theexercise.org. It's just the 2 words, the exercise, put together, 2 E's in a row there. And there's an online exercise that hundreds of thousands of people have done, by the way. And you can try it. And what it is it's a way for us to start transforming our vision into feelings and needs. And I don't have to that's all you have to do. If you can just get clear on what your feelings and needs are and what the feelings and needs of people around you are, the rest happens. It's you can't even stop it. It's compelling. Just like a 3-year-old being right in your, starving 3-year-old in your home. What happens is we really start to understand each other. And that allows us to have a connection that can bring us to peaceful coexistence. And at worst, peaceful coexistence. And at best, an incredibly productive life. Let's check my notes. Yeah, kind of like that. I think I've covered all the bases I would like to cover, and I would love to hear any questions you have, and please give me hard questions. I love hard questions.